Reality is only a hypothesis. The following document was recovered from the archived records of the Veylith Institute. Its authenticity has never been publicly acknowledged. Case File 001. Classification: Echo. Date of initial observation: November 18, 1998. Location: Observatory K17, Atacama Desert, Chile. For nearly 20 years, Observatory K17 had performed one simple task. Every night, precisely at 2:13 in the morning, Coordinated Universal Time, its radio telescope rotated toward a predetermined region of deep space. The equipment searched for faint radio emissions from distant pulsars, quasars, and naturally occurring cosmic phenomena. The process was almost entirely automated. Thousands of recordings were made. Almost all of them were forgotten within hours. On the morning of November 18th, technician Elena Vargas arrived for another routine shift. Nothing appeared unusual. The telescope had completed its scheduled observation. The system reported no equipment failures, no interruptions, no abnormal power fluctuations. Yet, while reviewing the night's recording, Elena noticed something impossible. A narrow-band radio signal appeared at the beginning of the file. At first, this attracted little attention. Artificial signals occasionally leaked into astronomical observations: aircraft, satellites, military communications. The anomaly should have been easy to explain. Then she checked the timestamps. According to the system logs, the telescope powered on at exactly 2:13 in the morning. Recording officially began 1 minute later. The mysterious transmission, however, appeared at 1:57, 17 minutes before the telescope had received electrical power. Elena assumed the system clock had failed. She compared the observation with the backup server. The same signal appeared. She restored the recording from an offline archive. Again, the signal was present. Every timestamp matched perfectly. Even stranger, the analog timing reference embedded in the recording confirmed the impossible sequence. The signal had been captured before the recording had begun. The observatory immediately suspended further observations. Within 48 hours, a team from an organization identified only as the Veylith Institute arrived on site. Their instructions were simple: do not discuss the anomaly. Do not contact outside researchers. Do not transmit any information. The Institute replaced every timing device inside the observatory. Every computer was removed. Storage systems were exchanged. Power regulators were replaced. Atomic clock synchronization was independently verified. If the anomaly resulted from equipment failure, it would never happen again. 3 weeks later, Observatory K17 resumed normal operation. Nothing unusual occurred during the first night, nor the second, nor the third. Then, on the fourth observation, the transmission returned. Exactly 17 minutes before recording began. Exactly as before. The Institute repeated the entire experiment using completely different hardware, different receivers, different software, different storage media. The result never changed. Whatever generated the signal seemed completely indifferent to the equipment observing it. It behaved as though the recording process itself was irrelevant. The phenomenon was assigned an internal designation: Echo Event 1. The investigation had only begun.
The Veylith Institute assumed control of Observatory K17 before sunrise the following morning. No official record explains how the Institute acquired that authority. The observatory remained government property. Its employees continued receiving their salaries from the National Astronomy Coordination Office. Yet from that day forward, every decision concerning the anomaly required the approval of Dr. Adrian Mercer. Within hours, the investigation expanded beyond the signal itself. The Institute's first objective was simple: prove that the observation could be explained by conventional science. If the anomaly was real, it would survive scrutiny. If it wasn't,
the investigation would expose the error. Every system inside Observatory K-17 was documented before being dismantled. The atomic clock responsible for timestamp synchronization was removed and replaced with a newly calibrated unit transported directly from an independent laboratory. The observatory's recording servers were disconnected. Fresh storage arrays were installed. The operating software was rebuilt from verified source code. Power regulators, timing controllers, signal processors, and receiver modules were all exchanged for new equipment. Nothing from the original observation remained connected. When the work was complete, Mercer ordered a single sentence to be written on the first page of the investigation log. Assume nothing, verify everything. 3 nights later, the telescope resumed operation. The atmosphere was unusually clear. No satellites crossed the target region. No aircraft entered the exclusion zone. Every instrument performed within expected tolerances. The observation ended. The data was archived. The investigators gathered around the main display. Nothing. No unusual frequencies. No unexplained transmissions. For the first time since the investigation began, the control room relaxed. Perhaps the anomaly really had been a hardware failure. Perhaps an obscure timing fault had created an impossible sequence of events. Mercer said nothing. He simply instructed the team to continue. The second night passed without incident. So did the third. By the end of the week, several researchers privately believed the case was already over. Then came the 8th observation. At exactly 2:31 a.m., the telescope completed another routine scan. The data transferred automatically to the archive server. No alarms sounded. No warning lights appeared. Everything looked perfectly normal. Until Elena Vargas opened the recording. She didn't speak. She simply turned her monitor toward Mercer. There it was. The same narrow-band signal. The same stable frequency. The same distinctive waveform. And once again, the transmission began exactly 17 minutes before the telescope had started recording. Not 16, not 18, always 17. Mercer requested every system log. Nothing had failed. Every clock agreed with one another to within a fraction of a millisecond. Power had reached the receivers at exactly 2:13 a.m. Yet somehow, the recording contained information from 1:57. Information captured before electricity had reached the instrument. The investigation entered a new phase. Over the following month, the Institute repeated the observation under increasingly controlled conditions. Entire receiver assemblies were swapped between facilities. Independent atomic clocks were flown in from 3 different laboratories. The telescope operated from backup generators disconnected from the national power grid. On one occasion, engineers deliberately delayed startup by 6 minutes without informing the analysis team. The signal adjusted itself. It still appeared exactly 17 minutes before recording began. Not 17 minutes before 2 o'clock. Not 17 minutes before sunrise. 17 minutes before the moment the telescope became capable of observing it. It was as if the phenomenon wasn't tied to time, but to the act of observation itself. No one could explain what that meant. As the weeks passed, Mercer ordered another line added to the case file. The anomaly appears aware of observational boundaries. The sentence sparked immediate disagreement. Several physicists argued that awareness implied intelligence. Others insisted the wording was careless. Phenomena could appear responsive without being conscious. Mercer refused to change the report. The evidence,
he replied, should not be edited to make us comfortable. By December, the Institute had accumulated 14 separate recordings. Every one of them was identical. Every one contained the same impossible 17-minute discrepancy. Every one appeared on brand new hardware that had never previously encountered the signal. Then, an engineer asked a question no one had considered. If this has happened before, how would we know?
The room fell silent. Mercer looked toward the observatory archive. For nearly 2 decades, K-17 had recorded the sky almost every night. Thousands of magnetic tapes filled the storage vault beneath the control building. Most had never been examined twice. Mercer gave a single instruction: retrieve all of them. Over the next 6 weeks, the archive became the center of the investigation. Boxes of aging magnetic tapes were carried upstairs one by one. Some had not been opened since the day they were recorded. Many had begun to deteriorate. Engineers worked around the clock, using restored playback equipment to preserve the data before it was lost forever. Night after night, they listened. Thousands of hours of ordinary cosmic background noise. Pulsars, solar interference, static, nothing unusual. Then, just after midnight on January 14th, an archivist named Daniel Cho stopped a playback machine in the middle of a routine transfer. He reversed the tape, played it again, then called Mercer without saying why. The recording contained the signal. Not a similar signal, the signal. The same frequency, the same waveform, the same impossible structure. At first, the discovery seemed encouraging. Perhaps the anomaly had simply gone unnoticed for years. Perhaps the Institute could finally establish when it had begun. Cho handed Mercer the tape's identification label. Mercer read it once, then read it again. For the first time since arriving at Observatory K-17, those present later reported seeing him hesitate, because the handwritten date on the tape read only 4 words: March 3rd, 1973. Observatory K-17 would not be constructed for another 11 years.
For several minutes, no one spoke. Daniel Cho remained standing beside the tape recorder, waiting for someone to explain what he had just found. No one did. Dr. Adrian Mercer picked up the magnetic tape and examined it under the light. The handwritten label was faded but legible. Observatory K-17, March 3rd, 1973. There was only one problem. According to every public record, Observatory K-17 did not exist in 1973. Construction of the facility would not begin until the spring of 1984. Its first successful observation would not occur until nearly a year later. The tape should have been impossible. Mercer immediately prohibited any discussion outside the investigation team. The archive vault was sealed. Every tape was cataloged and photographed before further examination continued. The Institute's materials laboratory was asked to determine whether the cassette itself had been fabricated recently. 3 independent analyses reached the same conclusion. The plastic housing matched manufacturing methods used during the early 1970s. The magnetic oxide coating showed decades of natural degradation. Even the adhesive used on the handwritten label was chemically consistent with materials available at the time. Nothing about the tape suggested forgery. If someone had manufactured it recently, they had done so with impossible precision. The Institute rejected that explanation. Mercer requested something far more difficult. He wanted to know where the tape had come from. The answer proved surprisingly ordinary. An inventory ledger showed that it had been transferred into Observatory K-17's archive during a storage reorganization in 1986. No one questioned it. The box containing the tape was simply marked legacy material. There was no sender, no covering letter,
no shipping records. No employee remembered seeing it arrive. It had simply always been there. The deeper investigators searched, the stranger the archive became. Additional tapes from the 1980s contained brief fragments of the same transmission. Several were never analyzed because technicians had dismissed the interference as equipment noise. One recording from 1989 contained the signal so clearly that analysts could identify individual frequency shifts with almost perfect accuracy. The anomaly had not suddenly appeared in 1998. It had been quietly waiting inside the archive for years. No one had noticed because no one had been looking. Mercer shifted the investigation away from history. If the signal could not be explained by its origin, perhaps it could be understood by its structure. A dedicated analysis group was assembled under Project Echo. Their task was simple: ignore where the transmission came from, determine what it was saying. At first, the data appeared meaningless. Random pulses, repeating frequencies, long periods of silence interrupted by precisely spaced bursts of energy. It resembled dozens of naturally occurring astronomical phenomena, until mathematician Dr. Naomi Ishikawa noticed something no computer had detected. The intervals between the pulses were not random. They followed prime numbers: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. The pattern continued for hundreds of values without deviation. Nature rarely behaves with perfect mathematics. Intelligence often does. The discovery transformed the investigation overnight. Engineers began stripping away background noise. Signal processing specialists isolated repeating layers hidden beneath the transmission. Week after week, additional structures emerged. Hydrogen spectral frequencies, universal physical constants, pulsar timing references. The transmission was deliberately built using measurements any technologically advanced civilization would recognize. It wasn't speaking English, or Spanish, or Mandarin. It was speaking mathematics, the only language believed to be truly universal. By the summer of 1999, the Institute reached its first official conclusion. The signal was artificial. Not probably artificial, not possibly artificial. Artificial. Someone had created it. The question was no longer whether intelligence existed behind the transmission. The question had become, what was it trying to accomplish? Months passed before the answer arrived. Ironically, it came from an intern. Graduate researcher Lucas Weber had been comparing the mathematical structures against known spacecraft navigation systems. Most of the team dismissed the exercise as unlikely to produce results. Then Weber noticed something unexpected. Several sections resembled positional coordinates. Not geographic coordinates, not celestial coordinates. Vectors, direction, velocity, relative motion. The signal wasn't describing an object. It was describing a destination. For nearly 3 weeks, astronomers and physicists worked independently, attempting to calculate that destination.
Every team reached the same impossible result. The coordinates did not point toward Earth. They did not point toward any known star, nor toward any observable galaxy. They pointed toward a location in empty space. At first glance, the coordinates appeared meaningless, until Institute astrophysicist Dr. Elias Kovac suggested applying one final correction. The solar system is not stationary.
It orbits the center of the Milky Way at approximately 800,000 kilometers per hour. Earth itself circles the Sun. The Sun moves relative to nearby stars. Nothing in the universe remains fixed. Kovács recalculated the coordinates using the projected future motion of the solar system. The room fell silent as the simulation completed. The destination no longer lay in empty space. It intersected perfectly with the position our solar system will occupy 241 years from now. No margin of error, no statistical uncertainty. The beacon wasn't pointing to where humanity existed. It was pointing to where humanity would be. Mercer stared at the projection for nearly a minute before quietly asking a question that was never included in the official report. If this signal was meant to meet us there, who already knows will arrive? No one answered, because no one in the room was thinking about the destination anymore. They were all thinking about something else. Whoever transmitted the beacon had not merely predicted humanity's future. They had predicted it with absolute certainty. And somewhere, 241 years ahead of us, they appeared to be waiting. By the autumn of 1999, Project Echo had become the largest active investigation in the history of the Veylith Institute. More than 40 researchers had been assigned to the case: astrophysicists, signal processing specialists, cryptographers, mathematicians, linguists, computer scientists. Every new discovery seemed to answer one question while creating several more. The official objective remained unchanged: determine the origin of the beacon, determine its purpose, determine whether humanity represented its intended recipient. The Institute maintained one strict rule throughout the investigation: under no circumstances would anyone transmit a reply. Dr. Adrian Mercer insisted that the decision was purely scientific. A signal that could not yet be understood should never be answered. Privately, several researchers believed there was another reason. Mercer never denied it. He simply refused to discuss it. The beacon continued arriving every November, always 17 minutes before the telescope began recording, always identical. It never grew stronger, it never grew weaker. It behaved less like a transmission and more like a fixed landmark, something that had always existed, waiting to be observed. By now, the investigation had produced thousands of pages of analysis. Every visible layer of the beacon had been mapped. Every mathematical sequence had been cataloged. The Institute believed there was nothing left to discover. Then, on February 8, 2000, signal analyst Dr. Miriam Holt made a decision that was not part of the original research plan. Instead of studying the strongest frequencies, she began examining the weakest. Her reasoning was simple. If someone had designed the beacon, they might have hidden additional information beneath the primary signal. The process took weeks. Cosmic background radiation overwhelmed almost every attempt. Most reconstructed samples contained nothing but random noise. Many members of Project Echo considered the effort a waste of valuable computing time. Holt ignored them. She continued refining the data, removing interference one frequency at a time. On the 32nd day, she found something. It wasn't mathematical. It wasn't periodic. It wasn't random. It was compressed. The structure resembled digital audio. The announcement was met with skepticism. The Institute had already identified dozens of false patterns that disappeared under closer examination. Mercer ordered the reconstruction to continue, but he instructed the team not to speculate. Evidence first, interpretation later. Over the next 3 weeks, the hidden layers slowly emerged from the noise. Tiny fragments of sound, milliseconds at a time. Entire sections were missing. Others appeared damaged beyond recovery. The recording was incomplete,
but unmistakable. It contained a voice. No one in the laboratory spoke as the restored audio was loaded into the playback system. The room lights were dimmed. Every external recording device was disconnected to prevent contamination. Mercer pressed play. For nearly 4 seconds, only static filled the room. Then, through layers of distortion, a calm voice emerged. "If you're hearing this..." The sentence was interrupted by interference. The voice returned. "Do not transmit." More static. Then one final fragment. "They use replies." Silence. The recording ended. The entire message lasted less than 8 seconds. No one moved. No one reached for the keyboard. Several researchers later admitted they had expected something impossible. Coordinates, alien language, an equation. Instead, they heard something deeply familiar. A human voice. Not emotional, not frightened. Measured. Professional. Almost as though it had been recorded by another investigator. The Institute immediately began forensic analysis. Every known language was compared. Every available voice print database was searched. The cadence suggested a native English speaker. The pronunciation was unusually neutral. No identifiable regional accent. No match was ever found. One possibility unsettled the investigators more than any other. The speaker sounded contemporary, not like an ancient recording, not like an artificial intelligence, like someone who could have walked into the observatory that same morning. Then another detail emerged. The audio layer existed on every recovered copy of the beacon, including the magnetic tape dated March 1973. The warning had existed for decades before anyone knew it was there. Mercer ordered a closed meeting of Project Echo's senior researchers. The discussion lasted nearly 6 hours. No transcript survives. Only the final recommendation appears in the archive. Recommendation 14A. No transmission is to be directed toward the beacon under any circumstances. The recommendation was unanimously approved.
Not because the researchers understood the warning, but because none of them could explain who had recorded it, or who they might be. From that day forward, every proposal to answer the beacon was rejected before discussion could begin. Officially, the Institute stated that caution demanded silence. Unofficially, the atmosphere inside Observatory K-17 had changed. Researchers stopped referring to the transmission as an object. They began referring to it as a conversation. Not one that humanity had joined, one that humanity had accidentally overheard. Late one evening, as Mercer prepared to leave the control room, Dr. Miriam Holt asked him a question that had been troubling her since the recording was restored. "If the warning is telling us not to answer," she paused, "then who was it actually meant for?" Mercer looked through the observatory window toward the empty desert. After several moments, he replied quietly, "I don't think the warning was sent to us." He closed the case folder. "I think we're listening to someone else's last message." For the first time since Project Echo began, the investigation stopped asking what the beacon was. A far more unsettling question had taken its place. If the warning wasn't intended for humanity, who was expected to hear it? The warning changed the direction of Project Echo forever. For nearly a year, the beacon continued to arrive exactly as it always had. Every November, always 17 minutes before Observatory K-17 began recording. The mathematical patterns never changed. The hidden voice never returned. The transmission behaved less like a message and more like a landmark. Something fixed, something permanent,
something that neither required nor expected human attention. The Institute reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The beacon was not reacting to observation. It existed independently of it. Whether anyone listened or not, the transmission continued. Several researchers argued that the only scientific response was to transmit a controlled reply. The proposed message contained nothing more than a sequence of prime numbers. No language, no information, only mathematics. If the beacon represented intelligence, perhaps intelligence would answer. The proposal reached Dr. Adrian Mercer's desk. He rejected it within minutes. His written explanation consisted of a single sentence. "We do not know what constitutes a reply." No further requests were submitted. Silence became official Institute policy. By the summer of 2001, Observatory K-17 was scheduled for permanent closure. Public records described the decision as routine budget reductions. The telescope was dismantled. Research equipment was packed into storage containers. Computers were disconnected. Servers were erased. On the evening of August 14th, the facility was completely powered down. According to maintenance records, electricity was disconnected from the entire control building at exactly 7:42 p.m. Every system fell silent. The observatory was no longer capable of receiving anything. 43 minutes later, maintenance engineer Rafael Ibarra returned to collect a toolbox he had forgotten. As he entered the control room, he heard a mechanical sound, a thermal printer. The device sat beside the operations console. Its power cable had already been removed. Its network connection had been disconnected earlier that afternoon. Yet a narrow strip of paper was slowly emerging from the machine. Ibarra watched without moving. No indicator lights were illuminated. No electrical power had been restored. The printer stopped after producing only 2 lines. Reply not detected. Observation continues. Then it fell silent. It never operated again. Institute engineers later dismantled the printer completely. No hidden battery was found. No internal memory capable of storing scheduled print jobs. No explanation was ever recorded. The paper became the final document placed inside Case File 001. Project Echo officially ended 6 days later. Before the archive was sealed, Dr. Adrian Mercer added one final note to the investigation. "We found no evidence that the beacon was intended for humanity, only evidence that humanity was capable of hearing it." Mercer retired from the Institute the following year. He never spoke publicly about Project Echo. Case File 001 remains unresolved. The origin of the beacon has never been identified. No explanation exists for how recordings appeared before they were made. No explanation exists for why identical recordings were discovered on magnetic tapes dated 11 years before the observatory itself was constructed. And no explanation exists for why a powerless printer acknowledged a reply that was never sent. The last recovered document associated with the case is dated November 18th, 2025, 27 years after the original investigation. It contains only a single sentence. Beacon detected. Characteristics unchanged. Beneath that sentence, written in different handwriting, appears one final remark. They are still waiting. This concludes Case File 001. The anomaly was never observed again at Observatory K-17. Officially, the observatory no longer exists. The beacon, however, continues to arrive every November, exactly 17 minutes before anyone begins listening.